Every few years, there is a coaching hire so unbelievably bad that people wonder how the dude ever got hired to begin with. In college football, everyone said that about Chad Morris. He was hired to be the head coach of Arkansas and ended up doing so poorly there that he's one of the worst coaching hires of all time, and people could not believe that Arkansas ever gave this guy a chance. Honestly, on paper, it wasn't the worst hire in the world when you looked at it, but ultimately the results were terrible. In the NFL around the same time, the Cleveland Browns gave a coach by the name of Hue Jackson an opportunity to lead their franchise. He was hopefully going to turn things around, but unfortunately, he became arguably one of the worst hires in NFL history, and at least in recent memory. In today's video, we're going to talk about just how bad Hue Jackson was as a hire for the Browns, go through his timeline, how everything got messed up, and ultimately just how terrible he was up in Cleveland. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of football, subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Hue Jackson. Hue Jackson started his coaching career in 1987 at his alma mater, the University of Pacific. He played quarterback there and started for 2 seasons, as well as playing some basketball. He did a little bit of everything for the Tigers in their last few years of existence, serving as a graduate assistant and later as a receivers coach, a running backs coach, and a special teams coordinator, all at the age of 26. While he was in his last year at Pacific in 1989, he shared an office with John Gruden, which ended up forming a friendship between the two that would last a long time. Hughes said, quote, "We used to be office mates. He taught me football, and we used to argue every day during that time. Like I said though, he taught me football. I was a wishbone quarterback at the time, and I've always given John a lot of credit for where I am today because he helped mold me and shape me into the coach that I am a little bit. There are a lot of things that I took." During his 3 years at Pacific, the Tigers went 4-7, then 2-9, and 2-10. Of course, he didn't stick around with the Tigers, as he ended up moving to Cal State Fullerton to be their running backs coach and special teams coach in 1990. He was there until 1991, where he split time as the running backs coach with the London Monarchs of the World Football League before accepting the running backs job at Arizona State in 1992. He was the running backs coach for the Sun Devils for 3 years, helping them run for 175 yards per game, 171 yards per game in 1993, and 128 yards per game in 1994. He then switched over to coaching quarterbacks, and he coached up terrific quarterback Jake Plummer, who threw for 2,200 yards with 17 touchdowns while he was at ASU. It was impressive enough for Cal and head coach Steve Mariucci to want to hire him to be their offensive coordinator in 1996, so he accepted and moved around inside of the Pac-10. At Cal, Hue helped coordinate the 31st best offense in the country behind guys like Pat Barnes and Brandon Willis. The Bears ended up going 6-6, but somehow Hue got called up and ended up becoming the offensive coordinator at USC in 1997. He'd be in Los Angeles from 1997 to 2000, flipping between being the QB coach and the running backs coach and being the OC the whole time. The Trojans went 6-5, then 8-5, and 6-6, and 5-7. Even with guys like Carson Palmer on the roster, they couldn't really get it going. Hugh just couldn't figure out how to get the parts to move well enough together, but that was okay, because he was set to fail forward again, this time as the running backs coach with the Redskins in 2001. With the Redskins, he helped coach a 1,900-yard rushing roster that included Steven Davis, Kenny Watson, and Kijana Carter. Steve Spurrier elevated him to offensive coordinator in 2003, where he helped lead the Redskins to a 5-11 season and the 10th worst offense in the league. From Washington, he moved on to Cincinnati to be the receivers coach from 2004 to 2006, and then Bobby Petrino hired him to be the OC in 2007, but when Petrino left for the Falcons and Emmett Thomas became the head coach, Hugh decided to look elsewhere for a job after the season, ending up in Baltimore, coaching rookie Joe Flacco as the quarterback's coach. He actually had some pretty significant success in this role, as Joe became the first rookie QB to win 2 playoff games in NFL history. He stayed in Baltimore until 2010, when Raiders head coach Tom Cable hired him to be the team's official offensive coordinator. Up until this point, Coach Davis had struggled to put together consecutive successful seasons, but Coach Cable needed a young spark to get the Raiders up and running. He was able to bring the Raiders to an offense that led them 6th in the league in terms of points scored, with 25.6 points per game, and had the 2nd best rushing offense in the country. The Raiders would finish at 8-8 and 3rd in the AFC West. Part of that was because of their running back room, which featured Darren McFadden, who ran for 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns, and Michael Bush, who ran for 655 yards and 8 touchdowns. The Raiders were impressed with the offense so much that they refused to rehire Tom Cable and elevated Hugh to his first ever head coaching position in 2011. At first, it looked like a great hire, as the Raiders started the season at 7-4 and were looking like a lock to make the playoffs out of the AFC West. Sadly though, they'd finished the year 1-5 and were right back at 8-8 after a massive collapse that featured 2 blowouts. It also included a 1-point loss to a terrible Lions team, and their only victory came on a field goal against the Chiefs in overtime. Oakland's offense regressed to 16th in the league, and their defense finished 4th in terms of points allowed. Unhappy with the fact that Hue seemed like he couldn't coach the Raiders out of a bad streak, the Raiders fired him before the start of the 2012 season. He ended up with the Bengals in 2012, working with DBs and special teams as an assistant coach, and he'd actually be a mainstay on the Bengals staff for a while. He was elevated to running backs coach in 2013, where he helped the offense reach 6th in the league with a two-headed monster in Benjarvis Green-Ellis with 756 yards and 7 touchdowns, and Giovanni Bernard, who had 695 yards and 5 scores. He was elevated to the team's offensive coordinator position in 2014, helping lead the Bengals to a 10-5-1 record and a berth in the wild card round of the playoffs. Hue's offense finished 15th in points scored, which was pretty bad, and Andy Dalton would have 17 interceptions. There was a bright spot as Jeremy Hill did go over the 1,000-yard mark, and Hue Jackson was an interesting name. The next year in 2015, the Bengals got even better, finishing at 12-4. They started the season 8-0 before limping to a 4-4 record in their last 4 games of the season, slowing down over time, just like Hue's teams tended to do. Despite Andy Dalton getting injured, backup quarterback A.J. McCarron was able to step in for 3 games and go 2-1 as the starter with over 800 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 2 picks. Both Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard were a 1-2 punch once again, with both backs going over 700 yards. He'd also be doing this with a fairly young offense, and this was great news for Hue Jackson, but he couldn't call the right plays when it mattered, and despite finishing first place in the AFC North, the Bengals lost in the wild card round to the Steelers 18-16. After the 2015 season, though, Hue started getting attention from some other football programs about returning to the head coaching position because of his success running the offense in Cincinnati, and one team that wanted him the most was the Cleveland Browns. In 2015, the Browns hadn't won more than half of their games since 2007 and had started an NFL record number of quarterbacks in that time period. Their best season was 2014, where they went 7-9 and missed the playoffs. They had gone 3-13 in 2015 and fired their head coach Mike Pettine, and a lot of their woes were on offense. So the Browns decided to clear house for 2016, firing their general manager and president, and they brought in a whole bunch of unproven boomer-bust front office guys to help them lead the team behind the scenes. Plus, they also hired Hue Jackson. With Jackson at head coach, the Browns actually had a pretty solid start, taking starters like Corey Coleman, Emmanuel Ogbah, Carl Nassib, and Joe Schobert, but that didn't mean their whole roster was all that good. The quarterback room rotated between a broken RG3, Cody Kessler, and Kevin Hogan, who they traded with the Chiefs for. Their lead running back was Isaiah Crowell, with Duke Johnson as his side back, and their best player overall was Joe Thomas. The Browns would finish 1-15 that season, with the second worst scoring offense in the league and the third worst defense in the league. Their only win came in the second to last game of the season against the Chargers. RG3 went 1-4 as a starting quarterback, but faced a lot of time off with injury, putting rookie quarterback Cody Kessler at the helm, who threw for 1,400 yards with 6 touchdowns and 2 picks, and Josh McCown also played. The Browns even rotated in Charlie Whitehurst and Kevin Hogan at times, and it was just a mess at that spot. As for the running game that Coach Jackson prided himself on, the Browns were led by Isaiah Crowell, who ran for 952 yards and 7 touchdowns, and former quarterback Terrell Pryor was their leading receiver with over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns, and besides that, their next leading receiver was tight end Gary Barnidge with 612. Outside of Pryor, the passing offense was awful. 2017 felt as if it couldn't get much worse. Coach Jackson made a lot of changes to his staff, including bringing in Greg Williams to be his defensive coordinator, and he hit the 2017 NFL draft hard. He would use their first overall pick to draft Myles Garrett, as well as 2 first-round picks on Jabril Peppers and David Njoku, as well as taking potential future franchise quarterback Deshaun Kaiser in the second round. But the Browns were really conservative in free agency, losing Terrell Pryor to the Redskins and failing to bring in a veteran quarterback to help their room. 3 quarterbacks on the roster were Kevin Hogan, Cody Kessler, and a rookie Deshaun Kaiser. They would bring in a receiver in Kenny Britt in free agency, but he proved to be a free agent bust. Without anybody to help mentor them, the Browns' quarterback room in 2017 proved to be one of the worst in the league. Pep Hamilton, who had been their quarterback's coach, left to be the associate head coach at Michigan, and instead of hiring an offensive play caller, Hue chose to call plays himself. Before the season started, he was so confident in the Browns turning it around that he would jump into Lake Erie himself if they went 0-16. Well, they did just that. The Browns finished the season with the worst scoring offense in the league and the second worst defense in the league in terms of points allowed, and didn't win a single game that entire year, going 0-16. Instead of giving Kaiser time behind a veteran quarterback to develop, they sent him out to start 15 games, and in those 15 games, he threw for 2,800 yards, 11 touchdowns, and a league-high 22 interceptions. The running game also got worse for Cleveland, with Isaiah Crowell regressing to 853 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Deshaun would actually lead the team in rushing scores with 5. As for receiving, Josh Gordon provided a spark in the 5 games he played in, but the leading receiver was Duke Johnson at running back with almost 700 yards. After the season was over, Hue made good on his promise and jumped into the lake. But the weirdest thing about it was the Browns didn't fire him. He would start 2018 as the Browns head coach. They did bring in some great players in the draft that year, like getting Baker Mayfield, Denzel Ward, Nick Chubb, and Antonio Callaway, and they also added free agents like Tyrod Taylor, Jarvis Landry, and Demarcus Robinson to help ease Baker into the NFL, but even with all that, the Browns could not put it all together. In week 1 against the Steelers, they didn't lose, but they didn't win either. They tied 18-18. They finally won their first game in over a season in week 3 against the Jets, 21-17, and this was the first game action for Baker Mayfield, who was sitting behind Tyrod Taylor, to learn in the NFL. They'd eventually win another game in week 5 against the Ravens in overtime, 12-9, but the Browns would finally wise up and fire Hue after a week 8 loss to the Steelers, leaving Greg Williams as the interim head coach. The worst thing about it for Hue was that the Browns actually got better immediately after he was fired, as they had finished the season at 5-3-0. Hue would finish his time as an NFL head coach with Cleveland with a 3-36-1 record and a career total of 11-41-1. After the NFL, he would go back to the college ranks, being the offensive coordinator for Tennessee State in 2021, and was the head coach at Grambling State for a couple of seasons before he was fired from there too. This season, he's an assistant at Georgia State. But it's clear he's never going to be an NFL head coach again. He's a classic example of a coach who failed forward, who put up a lot of good numbers with his offenses early on, but failed to develop his team all throughout any of those seasons, since they tended to get worse when the season progressed. I still can't believe he got hired to be the head coach of the Browns, but again, we all make dumb decisions sometimes. I hope the best for Hue moving forward, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to let me know down below. Let me know your thoughts on the hire, and what topic should I do next. Also, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen, including my video about what happened to that epic Browns draft class. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.